Welcome to Masterclass Wrestling with Class. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Today's guest, Ross Hart. Produced by Victoire. Masterclass is sponsored by Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market, serving California since 1972. Football, baseball, golf, whatever your sport of choice, whenever you visit Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley, visit Legends and Icons, your #1 choice for sports bars. Palm Springs, California, Indian Wells, California, Rancho Mirage, California. They're all considered a destination hotspot, a second home haven. With an exquisite record of negotiating the finest deals for clients, Lowell Folsom III and Associates always deliver. Contact Lowell today at 760-391-2504. And now on with the show. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to this very special episode of Victoire. I have the pleasure today of sitting down with one of the members of one of the greatest family dynasties of professional wrestling, the Hart family. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ross Hart.
Thanks, Amir. It's great to be on Victoire.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir. It's going to be a great interview. You have been involved in the professional wrestling industry your entire life. But before we get into that, I wanted to discuss the modern day professional wrestling and hear some of your insights into that with what was going on in AEW, WWE. How, in your mind, does that match up to what your dad was doing with Stampede Pro Wrestling?
Yeah, well, certainly wrestling has evolved, or pro wrestling has really evolved with social media, and the TV production is just phenomenal, with a lot of the television shows, especially WWE and AEW, and very slick pay-per-views, really excellent special effects and the camera angles. So, it's more enjoyable to watch than ever on TV, and I think the TV phenomenon is obviously translating to the bigger attendances at live shows and pay-per-views. This big show in Berlin, I guess, this weekend for the WWE, and the recent Wembley show that AEW had in England. So, and certain areas, wrestling is just on fire right now. It seems in Germany and France and the whole UK. It's really popular. It's on fire in the US and Canada, and I think pretty hot in Mexico as well. So I think it's great that there's two big federations, the WWE and AEW. It gives the fans more opportunity to see different brands. It's better for the wrestlers, so they can command the best salaries and contracts. So both AEW and WWE have to stay competitive and offer the best contracts to their talent. So I think it's great wrestlers, have that option if they can make more money with the other group. They certainly can. They can use that in their bargaining power to get a better offer with the rival group, and I think that's great for the wrestlers. I think there's the opportunity for them to make more money now than they ever did. And it's really good for the industry. So right now I think WWE's doing better. I think they've had some hot angles with the return of The Rock and at WrestleMania a few months back, and Cody Rhodes seems to be over really strong with WWE, and the Bloodline storyline has been really big, and obviously WWE's capitalizing on that momentum. They're selling out everywhere, and huge pay-per-views. So hopefully AEW can kind of catch up. It seems like they've dropped off in the last year, but and I think maybe they just need to look at their creative side a little bit, some of their storylines and angles, and I think their wrestling is great. They have some fantastic matches. Will Ospreay and Brian Danielson. A lot of
Champions. They're not born in the gym. It starts from the inside and it works its way out. Do you feel it more difficult to obtain muscle? Are you tired or perhaps depressed? Then there's a solution. Our brand new partner and sponsor, Care Aesthetics of La Quinta, are here to help you get restored to optimal health. Just use the contact information in this video and schedule your free consultation. Be sure to mention the name of the podcast, whether that be Power and Glory, Styling, Masterclass, or Hey Roma, when doing so. We wish you all the best in your road to optimized health. And now, back to the show.
and Brian Danielson. A lot of super talent, but maybe they just need to work on some of their angles and storylines. And hopefully they can kind of keep pace with WWE, because it's going to be better for the industry if both are strong, for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other really good independent organizations. TNA seems to be resurging a little bit right now. MLW seems to be pretty strong, at least in the South, and the NWA as well. So it's good. It's great. These promotions are doing well. It's great for some of the younger talent breaking in to get those opportunities there. And I think any of these young guys, wanting to do well in the industry are hoping, that the smaller groups will open a door for them to WWE or AEW or Japan or something, which is great. But it's great too, just to see um, the surge in the women's division now. Like WWE and AEW both have really strong women's divisions, and that's fantastic. And now there's different titles. There's singles and tag team titles of various kinds, and I think that's great as well. So I think right now it's kind of a boom period. We kind of got through the pandemic and the shutdown of all live shows, which really hurt the industry for a couple of years. I think it's still affecting Japan quite a bit, because they're not bringing over as many foreign guys, and they've had to rely more on local talent. But kind of having passed that now and seeing NFL and NHL and Major League Baseball doing well, attendance wise and TV ratings, wrestling's just sort of following in that same direction. So it's a really big time, good time for the industry.
Yeah, no, you definitely are. It seems that you are the historian of pro wrestling. You've caught up with it, you're up to date with it, and obviously you grew up. This was in your blood, with your father, Stu Hart, Stampede Wrestling. One of the things that did come to mind when you were speaking there was the frequency of wrestling today. So now we have a pay-per-view, it seems like every 2 weeks, and we don't have the traditional, name talent work, working with a worker. I don't like to use the word jobber. I never have liked that.
Yeah.
But you don't have that anymore. Would you say that do you think that was a good concept? And do you think that could be utilized again, or do you think that the world doesn't need that anymore?
I think there has to be kind of a happy medium there. I think sometimes on the TV shows they waste a lot of good talent, like putting top guys against each other, because they're trying to distance themselves from the one-sided squash matches, that TV tapings once followed for so long, right? But now I just find sometimes there's too much exposure to guys fighting each other already on Raw or SmackDown. They're supposed to be, on the pay-per-view. So, I think to get guys over, you still need kind of a nucleus of underneath guys, that are not necessarily jobbers, but their role is to get the more established guys over, and not squash matches, like fairly competitive matches, not something that goes 1 or 2 minutes, but I think there has to be more of that, because right now it seems like they're wasting a lot of talent in the these matches, and every time it's a finish where somebody else from the outside has to interfere. You know, somebody comes in from the dressing room and walks down the corridor to the ring, and you know it's going to upset the finish of the match, and the refs have to look so you know, stupid or distracted because they don't miss out, you know, they don't pick up on the interference. And I just find it's kind of a cop out because they don't
Yeah.
want to beat somebody right in the middle, but they're always um putting top guys against each other on the TV shows,
Mhm.
and somebody, you know, gets wasted in that process. So I think it would be better to keep the guys away from each other. Um, not like for instance, um, you know, um, I'm thinking of the bloodline feud there, you know, but you know, I wouldn't have Roman Reigns, you know, really um making any contact with Sokoa, you know, until they have their eventual match. You know, it might
Yeah.
be at Royal Rumble or something like that. But every time they have to have a run in where they have to ambush him and leave him out cold, and then he comes back 3 4 weeks later, and he's kind of on a more limited schedule. And I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
I think it kind of takes away the interest from the pay-per-view, the eventual match, because fans have already seen that exposure, even if it was just a run in or you know, an aftermath from a SmackDown match or something, you know. Um, you know, Dirty Dominic with um, you know, with Rhea Ripley, you know, and I guess they're going into a mixed tag match, but they've been interfering in each other's matches so much on Raw, you know, the last couple of weeks, you know, that you know, I honestly don't know that the pay-per-view will mean as much because they've already been going at it, and I think, you know, they're trying to keep the storyline alive, you know, and but it gets so predictable, Amir, you know,
Mhm.
where you can see the outside interference, you know, and it happens every week, and to me, it just becomes kind of a cop out finish, right? Guys can't lose in the middle of the ring, so I would rather see more of a traditional concept of just putting guys over strong on TV with the lesser guys, but keep them up and down so they're not losing every single week.
Yeah.
But that should still, I think, be more of the concept to get guys over on the TV shows and then save the bigger matches really for the pay-per-views, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's you know, and kind of minimize that exposure on the TV shows, and I think it would be the same with AEW too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
not hot-shotting everything too early, otherwise it's sort of already past its peak before you have Survivor Series or Royal Rumble or you know, WrestleMania. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And then talking about frequency and exposure, you mentioned there. So, you know, during the wrestling boom, we had approximately 4, 6 pay-per-views a year. So you had to savor those moments. Now, like I said earlier, you've got a pay-per-view, it seems like every 2 weeks. Do you think that the industry could survive if it scaled back to the traditional 4 to 6 pay-per-views a year?
Oh, I think so, and I think the main reason both major companies are having more pay-per-views is they're trying to outdo the other group, you know. But
Yeah.
I think it's going to level off, you know, where there's just too many and there's not as much interest except in the real traditional shows like WrestleMania, Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, and those are kind of unique matches, right? Unique
Yeah.
concepts. But I think even now it's getting to the point where there's too many pay-per-views, and you know, and that can kind of stunt or limit the potential of Royal Rumble or WrestleMania because you know, you've already put those guys against each other. So like if Roman Reigns and Sokoa have this big blow off with the bloodline, like they really shouldn't work against each other at all until maybe Royal Rumble. But
Right.
you know, they have to kind of keep them away from each other for a few months, you know. And but it seems right now, you know, they're having them go at it, you know, almost every second week or whenever Roman Reigns is available, you know. And I think that's going to kind of take away from the potential draw of a match they eventually have if they are saving it for Royal Rumble. And it's hard to project what they're doing. It looks like The Rock might come back and work with Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania next year.
Yeah.
You know, uh, but the Bloodline, it seems to be the hottest feud right now. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
but so that, you know, I think they have to be a little careful not to overexpose themselves to too many pay-per-views, right? And I think largely they're doing that just to outdo the other group, you know, to
Yeah.
steal their thunder. But I'd rather see about, you know, 6 to 8 pay-per-views during the year, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that would be enough, and then just, you know, focus on their TV shows. But it'll be interesting to see when WWE's on Netflix with
Yeah.
Raw, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't know. So people have to pay for that to see it on Netflix, right? But
Mm-hmm.
so it'll be interesting to see how their numbers are, and because right now people have just been watching it on USA Network,
Yeah.
and you know, they can get it on the different sports networks in Canada and the UK and other countries. But so, you know, if everyone has to get it on Netflix now, you know, which I think is affordable,
Yeah.
but it may lower their TV ratings a little bit, you know,
Yeah.
just that
Yeah.
sometimes fans don't react to changes very well. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, coming from you, you've seen the evolution of the business in the last, 4 decades. You were there going into your story now with your dad, Stu Hart and the famous Hart family. So let's go back in time now and tell a little bit of your story to these viewers about growing up in this wrestling family. You were exposed as a child. So what was life like for you, Ross, when your dad was in the thick of it and Stampede Wrestling, training Bret and Owen and Bruce? What was it like for you living in that?
Um, you know, it was really interesting, Amir, at that time, because there was not nearly as much TV exposure
Hmm.
for wrestling as there is today. Um, but then there was less competition from other sports, you know, at least in Calgary where I grew up, you know, we didn't have NHL hockey, you know, not until the 80s. You know, we just had the CFL, the Canadian Football League, but you know, we didn't have a lot. We didn't have Blue Jays, you know, playing baseball or soccer, which is becoming a pretty popular phenomenon. So wrestling was big on TV just because there wasn't a lot else to
Yeah.
watch, you know, on weekends, right? You know, if you were lucky, you maybe got a wide world of sports, and that was it. But you didn't have ESPN or TSN or anything. So you know, we always had pretty captive audiences, and people then were different than today's fans. You know, most of today's fans are pretty intelligent, and a lot of them know, you know, it's all you know, it's staged and predetermined, but they still love the matches, they still love the high spots, they still love to suspend their beliefs, you know, and watch it as spectators, even though, you know, wrestling unfortunately has been exposed just as entertainment.
Yeah.
But back then, you know, most fans, you know, I would say over 60% of the fans believed in the angles. You know, there was strong kayfabe, and wrestlers didn't hang out together. You know, and they were so diligent about not being seen together in gyms or restaurants before after matches. They would travel in separate vehicles. Usually, the heels would go in one vehicle, baby
Yeah.
faces another, and you know, I think that's why we had great reaction from fans, you know, and for me it was exciting because my whole life was surrounded with wrestling, and where I grew up, you know, my dad's house, you know, was the center of activity. It's where the dungeon was, where guys trained in the basement with him.
Mhm.
On the third floor was the office where my dad and mom, you know, ran the business day to day. You know, answered all the phone calls, and the wrestlers would come up and pick up their checks, and yet it was still the family household. It's where we had our family dinners every weekend. So our whole lives. You know, we're kind of surrounded by wrestling, you know,
Yeah.
in different forms. You know, and that was great. It was exciting growing up, you know, and, you know, naturally I had a celebrity status with a lot of kids at school. Sometimes some kids are envious, some were jealous, you know, so, you know, a lot of kids, wanted to be my friends so they could, come to the wrestling shows with me. And then others would, you know, take liberties with me and say, oh, they're all a bunch of, phony actors, right? You know, or that blood isn't real, you know, and then the fight would be on, you know. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was kind of a mixed reaction growing up, but for the most part, I really enjoyed it. You know, it was fun to be a part of, and I had so many different roles. I wrestled to an extent. I set up rings. I did security. I wrote the program. The magazines that went out with it, the press releases, and um, getting coverage for our wrestling promotion in the different wrestling magazines and publications that came out. So I probably neglected school quite a bit,
Right.
and other aspects of my life just because I was so focused on wrestling. But it was a lot of fun, and um, it was great, but eventually when the WWE became so big, um, in the 80s, and the promotional war started with WCW. All the small promotions just kind of got eliminated. They fell by the wayside. We just couldn't compete with the bigger groups as far as TV production or keeping the bigger stars. Almost all our big stars, including Owen or Brian Pillman or you know Hiro Hossie or Muck and Sing, Bad News Allen,
Yeah.
uh, the British Bulldogs, the Hart Foundation, they had to go where the money was and where the major TV exposure was, so, and
Wow.
it was just too hard to compete with them, and
Yeah.
you couldn't stop wrestlers from going there to Japan because that's where the most money was and where the maximum exposure was. But
Yeah.
it was a great ride though, for
Yeah.
30, 40 years. And I think Stampede put out a really good product. We had a different format. We had guys from all over the world. We had a lot of Japanese wrestlers. We had a lot of European wrestlers, a lot who came in from the British Isles. And we had kind of a lucha libre style. We brought in some guys from Mexico, and then anybody that kind of broke in the Stampede learned very well.
Yeah.
And a good cross section of American wrestlers as well. So it was kind of a melting pot of different styles, and everybody kind of came together and worked very well.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was I think a pretty high standard of wrestling.
Yeah. And what was the frequency like for you? And what were the numbers in the buildings that you were drawing at that time?
Calgary and Edmonton were our biggest centers. So when we were selling out there, sometimes we'd get 2,000 people in the pavilion or the Agricom, in both cities. And then some of our bigger shows we had in the Corral in Calgary. So sometimes we'd get 6,000, 7,000 people for a world title match, or when we featured somebody like Andre the Giant or someone. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then if we were drawing 500 or 600 fans, at some of the different spot shows, at the hockey arenas, the high schools, the community centers, that was great.
Yeah.
The biggest expenses obviously were, TV production, transportation, right?
Mhm.
And obviously you had to pay guys well to get them to come to Calgary, right? It
Yeah.
was far away, it was cold, it was long road trips, so you couldn't attract good talent unless you paid them well, right?
Mhm.
So you had to be drawing pretty steadily, just to break even, right? And for
Yeah.
our promotion, we had a lot of ups and downs. We had some great periods, some were kind of lean periods, um, but overall, it was a pretty thriving promotion, industry from 1948 when my dad started right till about 1989 when he retired from promoting.
And what was the frequency of the shows? Was it one a
We
week, one every 2 weeks?
Yeah, we ran bigger shows like Calgary and Edmonton every week,
Okay.
usually on Fridays and Saturdays, and then smaller towns we usually run every 2 weeks, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, a place like Saskatoon, Regina, we were running like once a week, right? And then other days we just run spot shows, with various rural communities, indigenous reserves, right? And it was amazing. Some of those places we drew as well
Yeah.
there as we did in Calgary, Edmonton, just because they didn't have as much entertainment, right?
Mhm.
And we didn't come maybe more than a couple of times a year or so, and then we would do it as a big fundraiser, with minor hockey or you know um Girl Scouts or something, right? Or it was always seen as a big fundraiser for the local organizations, right? And it was great. They made money, we made money, and we provided great live entertainment for these fans, and for them, they would never see WWE, come to their towns. They're just too small and out of the way. So when they got this chance to see Stampede Wrestling live, it was probably an even bigger event than Calgary or Edmonton, where we were going every week, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
now back then, obviously things were different. You didn't have social media. So how were you guys promoting? What sort of things were you doing to get the word out that there was going to be a show in town?
Yeah, other than the promos that we did on our TV shows, to highlight, our ankles, right? And so your TV show would kind of be designed to promote what you're going to be featuring on the next week, right?
Mhm.
And then sometimes if it was a really hot match, we just say it's not going to be on television because it might be very violent, or
Okay.
we expect there's going to be blood or something which we can't show on TV. So that was always kind of a formula to attract the fans to the shows. When we said, because of the graphic nature of this match, it won't be shown on television, so the fans would all flock to the
Yeah.
arena. But then we had to kind of go through that, and we had to give them what they wanted to see, right?
Yeah.
So we had to be careful not to um kind of falsely advertise that, and then not deliver it, I guess, in the end result. But yeah, and it was more traditional advertising, like putting up posters in shows, doing radio spots. Sometimes we would get TV interviews, which was great. But radio was very effective back then. And if we could get our top star doing a interview spot, especially with a radio station that was sponsoring or
Hmm.
advertising with us, and they would give us like 5 minutes or something like that. But there was one time Muck Singh was doing an interview, and it was on a BC radio station. And I think he'd called in from Calgary, and I think it was in Kamloops or someplace. And this was around 1987. And they told him they would have to preempt the interview because they were because the Prime Minister Brian Mulroney was delivering a budget. It's going to be major news on radio and TV, and so we kind of understood that. And then the guy interviewed Muck and Singh, and then the interview went so well, right? And
Yeah.
they just preempted the Prime Minister's interviews, and they delayed that just because the interview was going so well, and their audiences were so high, and Muck and Singh was building an angle, for the town, but he was also, or for the next show, but he also was a great interviewer. He could go on for an hour or two, and really cut some strong promos, and he did. So that was kind of a interesting time, but they actually delayed the Prime Minister's telecast so Muck and Singh could finish his promo, which went over an hour. So yeah,
Wow.
but those were traditional ways that we promoted the shows. Usually your TV show is your best advertiser, though. You
Mhm.
would use it to promote your local towns, right? And you had to kind of do that subtly through the shows, right? So it didn't become just like a long commercial to promote the out of town shows, and take away from the matches, and
Yeah.
um and really just build your storylines. You use your TV show to build your programs and storylines, and not give them too much on TV, but you also need to give them enough, to make it entertaining. We kind of strayed away from the squash job formats that a lot of other TV shows did. So we usually had more competitive matches
Mhm.
on TV, but still the purpose was to get guys over strong, um, and then build up to a big title match or a big showdown or rivalry, and that formula worked pretty well.
Yeah. And how old were you when you started working with your dad, started working in the business?
Um, Well, geez, I was probably selling programs when I was 6 years old, which was a little income, I guess, but it was just because I was going to the matches every week that I could do that. And then eventually I started working in the office, and doing more there, like helping my mom with the press releases and sending them to the different newspapers and radio and TV stations. And then, by the time I was maybe 16 or 17, I was helping set up rings and a little older, working security at the shows, right? And then
Yeah.
probably started wrestling maybe when I was about 24, had
Okay.
my first matches there. So,
Yeah.
but, for me, it was a whole bunch of different jobs, just whatever was needed, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and then, later kind of got into the coaching, working with my brother Bruce. He had the Hart Brothers training camp. So I was sort of an assistant coach, and we would have about 3 practices a week in the dungeon, and so I was quite involved with that,
Yeah. So
and
was
then
it, sorry,
yeah,
sorry,
and
sorry.
the TV production. So I was producing the TV show every Friday night after our live shows at the pavilion, and we only had about 4 or 5 hours basically to edit it and have it ready to air the next morning, the
Mm.
next day. So I was pretty involved with that for a number of years, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
which was great, and I kind of had a good idea what we needed to get over on TV. And sometimes we would have maybe 2 hours of footage, and I had to condense it to a 60-minute show, and consider what's going to be the most important, and what's going to keep the TV ratings up, but also translate to a bigger crowd the next week. So
Yeah. It sounds like an amazing experience. You went to film school, you went to sports academy, everything
yeah,
into
all
one.
those things.
So,
Yeah.
but was it for you? Was it a dream to get in the ring for you as much as it was, Owen and Bret?
I think when I grew up, like a lot of kids, yeah, I kind of fantasized about becoming a wrestler, but I kind of realized, and when I was in my early 20s, it probably wasn't going to happen for me. I didn't have the size, maybe, or the mechanics.
Hmm.
Um, so and I wasn't too disappointed with that. I was very happy for Bruce and Keith, who were established stars, and then Bret and Owen, and so there are already a number of Hearts, and that kind of weighed against me too. If I had wanted to become a wrestler, I probably wouldn't have had as much success as them, just because I would have been like the fifth one. The novelty was kind of wearing off. I think Owen was the last one to wrestle, and and of course, he was extraordinary, right? And
Yeah.
it would have been really tough for me to try and compete, or wrestle in his shadows, and I wouldn't have even tried. So yeah, and I was just happy for Owens and Brett's success. They
Yeah.
did really well, and Keith and Bruce did well in the 70s and 80s, and
Mhm.
when their period was kind of over, and they weren't wrestling as much or as in the spotlight as much, then Brett and Owen, did really well, and then certainly made it to the major stage, right? To
Yeah.
with WWE, they're doing tours of Japan and Europe, and so I was very happy with their success. So yeah, so I was happy just to be involved in the industry, and I'm kind of glad I didn't try to push myself, and force myself to get into the wrestling industry, because I really didn't have the size or the mechanics for it, but I was able to do it a little bit, and um, and I kind of just considered myself a good up and down wrestler, and I was happy with that, and in that sense, I still achieved my dream. I still got
Yeah.
in the ring. I still trained guys. I inspired guys, so there's different ways you can contribute
Mhm.
without having to be sent in front or as the main star yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say there are many, many, many factors that involved it to put on a pro wrestling show. Was there ever anything else for you in the background that caught your attention that you may do in life, career-wise, when you were younger?
Well, I went into teaching, and that's still my career today. And it's interesting because a lot of the writing and correspondence I was doing, with wrestling actually
Yeah.
helped me as a teacher. It taught me about writing and editing skills, and even like essay writing and research papers and things like that. And I probably wouldn't have developed those skills, if I hadn't had that background with writing and wrestling, so in a way it helped kind of prepare me for the teaching industry, and I think too, just psychology I use, communicating with students was sometimes what you had to do with wrestling, because you deal with some touchy or sensitive stars, and egos, right? And you had to put out some fires sometimes and deal with conflicts, um, for different reasons, right? Um, and and wrestling, you had to be a good communicator and be firm, but also understanding with wrestlers, because a lot of them dealt with a lot of issues, right? And you couldn't be too hard-handed, but you also had to be firm. Otherwise, the wrestlers would be running the show, and there'd be chaos, and there'd be no order or control.
Yeah.
So I just found some of those communication skills I used to deal with wrestlers, even if I had to discipline them or critique them, right? Um, is what I've been doing successfully with kids, right? And it's more reasoning with them rather than disciplining them,
Mhm.
and it's more teaching them, rather than lecturing them.
Yeah.
It's been nice. There's been a lot of transferable skills, between
Yeah.
wrestling and teaching, and it's odd, where I teach. I'm in a outreach setting, so most kids only know me by my first name. They don't know me by the name Hart at all, and sometimes it'll be 9 or 10 months later, some kid will come up to me and say, "Are you related to Bret Hart?" And for some reason, it just struck them, that there was some resemblance there, or maybe their parents knew, about the Hart family, but they only usually know me on a first name basis. But somehow, somewhere, they pick up on it. They clue, that I look like one of the Harts, or maybe they incidentally find out my last name, and then it's like this long lost discovery, and they're major wrestling fans, but I usually try not to tell kids my last name, because I know that's just going to be a distraction, and all they want to do is talk about wrestling, right?
Right.
Instead of
Right.
about English, right? Like boring Shakespeare, or novels or short stories. So I usually don't emphasize it, and if the kids pick up on it later, or sometimes they'll be at a parent teacher interview,
Hmm.
and their mother or father will recognize me and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I used to go to Stampede Wrestling like 30 years ago," and
Yeah.
they're surprised, when they see me. See, "Gee, we didn't know you went into teaching," so
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been rewarding, and I still like to stay connected to the industry. I still like to follow it, and I don't know if my advice really is going to be that helpful for someone today, but I think there's still a lot of things young guys breaking in can learn from somebody like me, and
Yeah.
it's and it's I I would just emphasize you know putting size on, building your physique, looking like you're an athlete, and make sure you have proper gear. Like, it looks terrible when some of these guys are coming in the ring and they don't even have proper footwear, or
Mhm.
trunks, so they don't even have a robe or a jacket, So I think if you're really serious about wrestling, you have to look the part, you have to look like an athlete.
Mhm.
And then you have to be unique. You have to be something different, and not just copying other wrestlers, but um, and come up with your own style, but be safe in what you do, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of it comes down to having a good teacher, right?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, there's too many backyard wrestlers that didn't get that proper training, and once they've been wrestling, a few months, it's really hard to undo bad habits then. So I think it's really important that you have a good foundation, that you have a good teacher, and then you're working with some good experienced guys, that you
Yeah.
can learn from.
Yeah. And you brought up one thing there that's near and dear to me about character development. And about training these guys of what you can bestow upon them. Because we are building upon, what's already been done in the past. I just had this
Yeah.
conversation with my wife. You can't completely rewrite the book. You have to look back to what brought you to the dance. And
Yeah.
obviously your dad's era, the 80s and 90s are what catapulted WWE to be what it is today. So as a young wrestler coming out, you would have to look back to that time period and build upon it, not say I'm going to completely change it and do it my way. So I think, with you sharing those little gems from your time period are extremely helpful. But in terms of character development, Ross, because I agree with you on the gear. I think I
Yeah.
do see a lot of that where there's everyone looks the same. They have the same trunks, the same pattern on their trunks. They're not, how in your mind, and maybe you can help, really accentuate this, articulate this rather to the audience. What makes a great gimmick, a great character? Just describe how maybe someone like why is The Rock such a great character? Let's use him as an example.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is charisma, strong interview skills, you know, self-confidence, and then looking the part. I think you have to be in great shape.
Mhm.
You have to have a decent physique, and um, yeah, I think those are all important. And and then you have to know your fundamentals, right? You
Mhm.
you have to learn your basics, and then focus on some kind of a unique character or persona that
Yeah,
nobody else has, right? And that's hard, coming
yeah,
up with something original. But um, I think a lot of it's sort of based on the social trends, and what we're seeing, in wrestling and in entertainment today. And in some cases, it can be a little bit controversial or off color, but you can't go overboard with that. Something
Mhm.
that's too distasteful or sexist or anything. Now there's just so much censorship, and you have to be careful. So um, yeah, and so there's different roles. It could I and I think part of the problem is if you come out in one role and that doesn't get over, you've been exposed on TV, then what are they going to do with you after
right,
that? They
right,
kind of just send you back to the drawing board, and then they have to repackage you and bring you out. And
yeah,
there's only so many ways you can disguise or camouflage somebody, so
yeah,
so and it's tough. I see it a lot in WWE and NXT, and guys sometimes just didn't have the right role or the right storyline, and they didn't get over, or they weren't ready,
mhm,
to go on Raw or SmackDown or something. And sometimes it wasn't their fault. It was just a lack of imagination or creativity by the bookers or those in creative. And I feel bad for some of those wrestlers, um, and some of them never really quite get back on track. They never do. Those that have a lot of talent and patience and perseverance can, but then they sometimes have to be, reinvented, totally different role. I think we saw that with guys like Glenn Jacobs, who is Kane, and a few others, who had different personas or roles. And then, Mick Foley was another one. But, when they finally got over, they had very lasting success,
yeah,
and momentum too. So, um, yeah, and I think wrestlers have to, come up with their own ideas, because if you're just relying on story writers, right, you may not be happy with the role
yeah,
they come up with you. So I think you come up with something, and then you pitch it to your booker, your promoter, and then you see, and they might like it. If they don't, at least you've tried. You pitched an idea or a concept,
mhm,
to get yourself over to them and see. But I think wrestlers have to kind of take their own initiative and come up with something.
mhm,
But it has to it has to fit their size and style and their personality, right? So
yeah,
if you're a smaller guy, you're going to have to rely on high flying and aerial maneuvers, right?
mhm, mhm,
And if you're a bigger guy, you're going to have to rely more on, size and power, and you're going to be expected to be more solid in your execution just because of your size, right? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You brought up about character development more recently, L.A. Knight. So there's an
yeah,
example because he was Eli Drake, very successful in NWA, comes in as Max Dupree, totally different character, and now he's L.A. Knight, and he's over, and you know,
yeah.
pretty much he is Eli Drake. He's playing Eli Drake just as L.A. Knight, but that's him. That's his persona. It's him coming through. Now, what about your dad? Going back to your dad, was he very lenient with the guys? If the guys came in and if he could tell they really thought it out and it was part of their personality, the characters, or was he very stringent on giving the character, giving the gimmick to the guys that would come in?
Um, some of the guys breaking in, we had to kind of mold them and craft them to be
Mhm.
what we wanted. Other guys who are established from other territories, promoters, my dad would kind of let them do their thing, and
Right.
if they needed tweaking or critiquing, he would give it to them, right? I think
Yeah.
my dad really emphasized just making it look like a real contest, right? He wanted things to look solid, and our fans were very critical, right? If they saw something that looked light or phony, they would boo.
Yeah.
And so I think for my dad, it was really looking the part and making it look like a real contest or struggle, and this was long before wrestling was kind of exposed as just entertainment, right? So, um, and yeah, so we usually kind of let guys bring in their own characters when they did,
Mhm.
right? And then and if we needed to modify it a little bit, we did, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, and I can say that most guys who left Stampede were good enough to go anywhere. They could do well in the Maritimes, they could do well in the AWA, they could do well in world class, they could do well in Japan or Germany. You know, the the um the level and quality of wrestling was so high, in Calgary, the standard was so high that most guys did well everywhere else they went.
Mhm. What was some of the highlights for you perform while you were performing? Some of the highlights, some of the guys you faced while you were in the ring.
Um, when I wrestled for Stampede, there are a few guys that really were good craftsmen. Probably don't get nearly as much credit as they deserve. But guys like Angel Acevedo, the original Cuban assassin, and Jerry Morrow, they wrestled as the Cuban Commandos. They were a great tag team. And they were so giving. They would call the whole match for you. They would sell for you. All you had to do is listen to them,
Mm.
and follow their lead.
Yeah.
And they were really good professionals. They never hurt you. Um, they never stiffed you, and they could carry anybody. Anybody who was even very green or inexperienced. Gamma Singh was another good one. And his son Raj is working. I think he's with the NWA now. So and his nephew's Jinder Mahal. But
Oh
those are
yeah.
guys that were really good guys to learn from, and
Mhm.
get experience with. Mr. Hito, he's sort of a forgotten Japanese legend, who trained my brother Bret, him and another Japanese guy named Mr. Sakurada. He wrestled as Kendo Nagasaki in the States and Japan, but really good teachers, strong work ethic. These guys would be doing 500 squats a day and working out in the gym and doing neck bridges and chin ups, just in fanatical condition. And they could go all night long.
Yeah.
You could watch them wrestle for 25, 30 minutes, so I certainly learned a lot from them. Some I got the opportunity to wrestle against, which was great. And I loved watching their matches. Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith, they were just phenomenal athletes. They brought over that British style and kind of revived it, after it had dropped off in Canada for quite a few years. We had a lot of heavyweights that came over from UK that
Yeah.
were big in the 70s, the late 60s and early 70s. Then it kind of dropped off for a few years. And then when Dynamite Kid came here, just totally revolutionized wrestling,
Yeah.
the lighter weight division. And that was great. And just, the moves he and Davey Boy did, and they both had the same trainer, were just phenomenal. They're
Yeah.
just outstanding. So for me, the opportunity to wrestle some of those guys or just watch them night after night, you know.
Yeah, yeah. That no, it was incredible. You mentioned the Davy Boy. I had the opportunity of meeting him one time in the
Oh
UK.
wow.
Yeah, when I was 12 years old. So
Uh,
I had the
where was
opportunity.
that?
It was actually in my hometown. I grew up in Watford in the United Kingdom,
Yeah.
and it was in between his run in WCW before he went back to WWF. So it would have been 94, somewhere around.
Yeah. I did a tour there with him one time. I came over for a summer when I was on a break from teaching, and I wrestled there for about 5 weeks
Yeah.
with him on the shows. It was just before he was going back to WWE, and that was great. So we were wrestling in, some of these smaller places, but drawing great. We were getting,
Yeah.
400 or 500 fans, because he had such name value at that time, right? He was
Yeah.
still a big star,
Yeah.
so yeah, he was, and it was probably just a couple of years, after he had his big Wembley match in '92 with Bret,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it was great, having the opportunity to wrestle overseas, and make some money, and um, kind of get away from all the office duties there. All I had to do was perform. I didn't have to worry about setting up rings or getting the wrestlers to the shows or payrolls or advertising or publicity. I just had to go and travel and perform, and it was kind of nice. I had that opportunity with Davey in about '95, I think, and it was
Okay. So
great. Yeah,
was that,
yeah.
did you continue wrestling after that, Ross? Or
I
was that
did part time, and then I kind of retired by I think about 2000, 2001. So
okay?
yeah, and I realized then, so I was starting to acquire a few injuries, and and I thought, there's a younger generation here that we should be focusing on, and I didn't need to be trying to get myself over, put myself over. And usually I was pretty unselfish. I always just did whatever was best for the show. But
Yeah.
I just figured, I've had my time and place in the industry, and I'd rather just focus on developing new guys and breaking them in. But I enjoyed it while I did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something else earlier, which I wanted to touch on as well, was the kayfabe aspect, because
Yeah,
obviously it was so well done. I mean, I remember as a kid, my dad would say, "Oh no, it's all scripted," but I
yeah,
still wanted to believe it. But then that point came in the mid to late '90s, and of course, Brett was involved with Wrestling with Shadows,
yeah.
which was part of that. Now, when you were approached by that, when the Hart family was approached by that, what did your dad initially think of doing something like that?
Um, I think it was great that they did a documentary on Brett, and it was amazing the footage they got behind
Yeah,
the scenes and what was going on in the dressing rooms, but also exposing that whole Survivor Series, the Montreal screw job and all that footage they had,
yeah,
behind the stages near the dressing rooms, and just amazing. So, but it unfortunately told a lot about wrestling that fans didn't know before,
mm,
about
mhm,
matches being scripted and wrestlers having creative control over their contracts as Brett was supposed to have,
yeah,
when he was leaving the company. So in some ways it benefited the WWE because it turned Vince McMahon into a major heel star,
yeah,
the main player, and that uh, vendetta he had with Stone Cold Steve Austin and the whole Attitude Era, and it didn't work out as well for Brett because he was badly misused when he went to WCW. But it kind of exposed wrestling, though, as predetermined, and fans saw a different side of it. It's a lot about money and guys maybe not wanting to lose, in certain under certain circumstances, as was the case with Brett and Shawn Michaels. So and that certainly changed the image of wrestling, so a lot of fans don't see it, as a real contest. I think they still want to, I think a
mm,
lot of people watching, they still want to suspend their beliefs and not know what the outcome is going to be. But I think it took a lot of the mystique and curiosity away from fans because
mhm,
now, and to be honest, WWE had already used that as a bargaining position with local commissions that they wanted replaced, because these commissions were were pretty high-handed in different cities. They wanted wrestlers all checked, physically before they could perform in the ring, and wanted a lot of money. And by exposing it as entertainment,
mhm.
as theater, he was able to eliminate a lot of the commissions, right? So they
Oh,
no
okay,
longer had a role because it was no longer a athletic contest or a sports
okay.
competition, right? Even but I will say this, what wrestlers do in the ring is very athletic.
Yeah,
It's very high risk, and there are a lot of injuries, and there is a lot of timing and care that's so important, right? So they're not just a bunch of phony actors or entertainers, right?
Right.
They're high level performers, right? And and they do acquire a lot of injuries and wear and tear, on their bodies. But that was certainly a pivotal time, though. When wrestling was seen in a totally different light, and it certainly changed the face of the whole industry. Especially with that documentary, Wrestling with the Shadows.
Yeah, definitely did. One of the things that, again, perhaps many fans, it's been on their mind. Maybe it's been addressed, maybe it hasn't. At the time, I never quite understood the reason why Vince let Bret go, because the story was that there was nothing left for him, but yet he had gotten into a role with the Hart Foundation that was arguably one of the hottest things that WWF had that year. So was there anything else that you're allowed to say that happened behind the scenes were the reason why they had to part ways, or was it just
I
what?
think it was about money. Brad had just re-signed with WWE maybe a year, 18 months before that.
Mhm.
And WCW had pitched an offer to him then,
Yeah,
and Vince paid him more money. And I think he was the highest paid wrestler in the company at that time.
yeah,
But I think Vince felt he was losing money. He was paying way too much to talent, right? It was in the midst of the promotional war with WCW, and each one was outbidding the other.
yeah.
WCW had paid a fortune to bring over Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and they were paying them huge salaries. And then Vince was having to pay a lot to Undertaker and Bret and Shawn Michaels.
Mhm.
So I think he just felt he couldn't afford to pay Bret
Okay.
that salary anymore. And it was a contract. I don't know. It should have been enforceable. And but he basically, from what I understood, just told Brett, I can't afford to pay you this, and will you take a pay cut? And for Brett,
Yeah,
he wasn't willing to do that. Just
right.
especially since WCW had offered him almost that much
Yeah,
the year before, and Brett out of loyalty, and wanted to stay with WWF, and finish his career there, so. And then after Brett negotiated with WCW, Vince didn't intercede in time, and then he did make a last minute pitch to Brett. I'll keep you. Let's try and work things out. I'll try and pay you this, and Brett had already made the commitment with WCW, and he wasn't going to turn them down a second time. So
right.
so
Yeah,
Vince kind of just dropped the ball there, but it was really an unfortunate time because business was so hot with
yeah.
the North-South feud, where the Hart
Mhm.
Foundation were over like baby faces in all of Canada and at
Yeah,
heels in the States, right?
yeah,
And at war with Stone Cold and Shawn Michaels and Triple H and the Road Warriors. But in Canada, they were loved, and it was great, and we had two different factions, right? In Canada, they were booing all the established stars that were going against their Canadians, and it was a great storyline. And
yeah,
that pay-per-view, they had that Canadian Stampede show in
yeah,
'97, huge crowd, and it was probably one of the best pay-per-views the WWF ever had,
yeah,
where they had the whole Hart Foundation, right, against
yeah,
I think it was Stone Cold, Ken Shamrock, the Road Warriors and Goldust. It was just incredible, the atmosphere there, and then suddenly that all kind of came to an end, when Brett left 5 months later, and under the circumstances, it was so much clouded, by the screw job there, and the way that they handled that,
mhm,
and unfortunately, WCW just dropped the ball with Brett.
yeah.
They got him there, and then they didn't know what to do with him.
Right.
Totally mismanaged him, mishandled him. And it was such a waste of
Mhm.
his talent and what he could have done for the company. And I think of what Brett could have meant for WCW, and they wasted him. And I think there are certain guys there, who were booking like Nash and Hogan that didn't want to see Brett get over. Maybe they had heat with him when he was in WWF and he
Mhm.
was coming up, and maybe replacing them. Uh, and so this was kind of their chance to try and lower him,
Mm.
below them, and it was really too bad. So they're paying him all this money and wasting him, and
Yeah.
it was unfortunate. And then we saw the demise of the WCW year or two later, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They uh, they had so much momentum. They were outdrawing WWE, at least with the TV ratings and pay-per-views, but they they their house shows were very poor, and the wrestlers got out of control. The wrestlers weren't showing up at a lot of the house shows, and their momentum dropped.
Mhm.
And they kind of mishandled Goldberg and how well over he was, right? And they just kind of self-destructed. They imploded on their own, and it was really too bad because it was great when there were two major promotions in the industry. It
Mhm.
was great for fans, great for wrestlers, and WWE emerged, right? And it was really, it wasn't because their promotion was so good. It was just the WCW self-destructed, and they had terrible storylines, and
Yeah.
and they really wasted their talent, and
Yeah.
the core guys they had on top, they were just thinking of themselves and not the promotion, right? And
Yeah.
everything kind of blew up in their own faces, and
Yeah.
it was too bad, right? And
Yeah.
WWE bought their library for what they bought the whole promotion, and the
Yeah.
library for $2 million. It was a
Yeah.
travesty, what they acquired and what they had to pay so little for,
Yeah.
like when WCW finally folded. So
It
yeah,
it was such a fast demise. I've talked about this in other interviews. It was unbelievable, the decline of that company. You could
yeah,
not recognize it from 99 to 2000. It was unrecognizable.
yeah,
Like you said, the storylines were short. They were completed within a couple of weeks. There was nothing to wait for anymore. Everything was given to you every week on TV, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Savor the moment. Don't overexpose the
yeah.
talent. Otherwise, it waters it down. During that time period, Ross, were you heavily involved with Bret, with Owen? Were you helping them out, giving them advice, things like that? Or at this time, would you kind of segued out of the business completely?
Um, by that time, Bret and Owen were pretty established stars already, but I sometimes I would just talk to them and offer my opinion, but yeah, I certainly wasn't giving them advice on how to perform or wrestle, but
Yeah,
I certainly let them know, you know, and they were so sound in the ring,
yeah,
they were such good performers. So I think they liked the feedback, they appreciated hearing it from someone in their family who's going to be a little more honest, right? And
yeah,
less biased, right? So, I love to give Owen feedback on how well he was working, or Davy Boy,
yeah,
and say, hey, that was a fantastic match, and it was great, and for me, I was just so happy they were doing well, having great matches. They were over, and making good money, and I wish it had lasted longer for some of
yeah,
them,
yeah.
yeah.
What was some of the highlights? So let's go first with Brian Pillman because he came through the Stampede. What was some of the highlights for you seeing him in his career? What was the highlight?
Brian, when he first started out, his football career had kind of been cut short.
Hmm.
He was trying out for the Calgary Stampeders, so my brother Bruce kind of recruited him and trained him,
Hmm.
and he's just a phenomenal athlete. Just incredible agility and athleticism. The drop kicks and the leapfrogs and the cross bodies. Like if you see some of his really early matches with Stampede, unfortunately, he wasn't at that level when he went to WCW or when he went to WWE. He had been racked up with so many injuries and then mental health issues. And but he was just an incredible performer. He just had so much athleticism, strong interviews. And it was great for him. It kind of gave my brother Bruce second lease on his career because Bruce was kind of aging, but he formed this team with Pillman, and they were called Bad Company, and it kind of revived Bruce, and all of a sudden he was a big star, in tag teams, and he was venturing out a little bit, not just doing what he was, his in his usual routine, and I think Bruce gave Brian a lot of guidance and taught him a lot about timing and how to sell and make comebacks. But I think Brian, his youth and exuberance in the ring really catapulted Bruce to a higher level, which was great. And Owen was just a naturally gifted athlete. He was just so spectacular in the ring, but he kind of learned from his brothers. He learned a lot from Dynamite Davey when he was growing up, and he kind of just took the best out of all their wrestlers and made it his own.
Yeah.
And so some of his early matches, with Stampede were great, and I just knew Owen had such a great future, and then he had incredible matches in Japan and the UK, and did well all over, so it was pretty exciting, that's kind of what I remember. Chris Benoit was another, just a great performer, patterned his style a lot after Dynamite Kid, and incredible work ethic, really colorful performer, Chris. So and all these guys, they went on to become
Yeah.
big names anywhere they went. So
Yeah, they were great ring tacticians, all of them. As you mentioned them all, I get glimpses of some of the matches in my mind with Owen, Pillman. Yeah, you mentioned Benoit, Bret, Davey, the Dynamite Kid. They were so crisp. They were so good at telling a story in the ring. They didn't fumble. They were so precise, is a word that comes to
yeah,
mind when
yeah.
thinking of them.
Whole
Uh,
bunch of the Japanese that came here, were just incredible. Like Jushin Liger, he came
oh, yeah.
here. Is before they kind of launched him in Japan, and Hiroshi Hase, who was big star with New Japan, and really sound technical wrestler. But he had some great matches with Owen, so it was just incredible seeing these guys. They all had something different, right? And it's kind of nice. I can say, when I unfortunately watch WWE, a lot of the guys look the same. You can just tell that's how they were taught in NXT, the way they throw guys into the ropes, the way they do reversals, right? Everything looks the same.
Yeah.
Nothing really stands out
Yeah.
as unique, right? And they don't allow enough variety of styles, right? And a lot of them kind of just look the same, right?
Yeah.
With Stampede, it all looked different. There was
Yeah.
a different Japanese flavors from the UK flavor, and the States was a little different from Canada, and it all molded into a great multicultural, I guess, type
Yeah.
promotion.
Yeah.
With styles and influences from so many different promotions and countries.
hmm Well, I think even Hollywood, if I was to compare Hollywood to pro wrestling now, it's similar. Way back when, Hollywood would take risks on new writers, new screenplays, new stories. These days, you don't really see too many risks. You see a lot of remakes. And I
Yeah,
think that now WWE has been essentially bought by Hollywood. You
yeah,
have the same idea now starting to emerge in the WWE product. Obviously, AEW can still be multicultural, more of a melting pot. And
yeah,
you see a difference in their presentation. They are still scouting guys from the independents, whereas WWE are bringing them in to the performance center. They're scouting collegiate athletes.
yeah,
So they're not really looking. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not there, but I'm saying it appears that they're not really scouting from anywhere else. And I think that's what made them successful back in Bret Owen Davies' time. And obviously, your dad and Stampede Wrestling had a
yeah,
huge part to play in
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
So,
and I can really honestly say that when I look at the level and caliber of matches in the mid 80s, when Hulkamania was just launched, but they had, Ricky Steamboat, the Macho Man,
mhm,
the Bulldogs, the Killer Bees, especially their tag team division,
yeah.
nothing today compares to that period
Oh, yeah.
back then, um, you know, uh, the distance, guys could wrestle long matches, right? And they had so many different guys that were really, and then, WWE had obviously recruited and stolen the best talent from the other organizations, but it just seems like the level and caliber of matches isn't nearly today what it was in the mid 80s,
Yeah.
you just don't see that standard. But hats off to the guys that are working hard today. There's still a lot of great talent out there today,
Yeah.
and some incredible young superstars that are emerging.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's definitely, like you said, there's a reason it is still successful today. We often, my wife actually joked with me, and she says, well, you're always going to look back to when you were younger. It's never going to be as good as that, right? I guess the saying is true. We always look back to a younger time in our lives and think nothing can duplicate that time period. So it might just be that, maybe at least I need to move forward with the time slightly.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but today, Ross, in terms of pro wrestling, now we know you were at the Cauliflower Alley Club reunion 2024 awards in Vegas last week. So you are still an active community of the professional wrestling industry, and you are still working as a teacher. What else are you involved with currently, pro wrestling wise, in Canada?
Um, well, I'm helping out with the dungeon promotion. My brother Brett's son Dallas runs about 4 or 5 shows a year in Calgary. I'm
Okay.
hoping they expand to Edmonton and some of the other centers, but so I'm working behind the scenes. I write the program, the magazine for that, for their shows, and some of the releases, the press releases that they put out on social media. So stay involved to an extent with that. And I'm not training guys as much now, but that's something I wouldn't mind getting into, if there's a good facility. Unfortunately, when our house got sold and the dungeon was sold with the house, we didn't really have that training facility anymore.
Yeah.
You know, where we could train guys. And I think my brother has one ring. My brother Bruce still has one ring, but you really need a good indoor facility.
Yeah.
Where you can set up the ring and really teach guys rope work and mat work and all that. So
Yeah.
maybe if I retire from teaching, if somebody can benefit from my expertise, wouldn't mind having a hand training or developing guys. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you've got the mind for it. You grew up in the business, and that was a question I was going to ask you. If you were to say the percentage of your thoughts on a daily basis, how much of those lean towards pro wrestling on a daily
Oh, geez.
basis?
uh Boy. So I don't want to incriminate myself here, so I'm off task, as a teacher. But no, but I still watch some of the TV shows during the week, and there's so much that's on YouTube and social media, so I'm always kind of following wrestling, and you're always getting communications. Unfortunately, I've gotten communications recently about wrestlers who passed away, and like Sid Vicious and
Yeah.
Fansika and Oya and some of them. So you're hearing that all the time. It's just sad. Some of the older generation stars are passing away.
Yeah.
I think as age and a lot of injuries kind of catch up to them. But yeah, so I think about wrestling probably every day. And I keep in touch with some of my nephews and nieces, ask them how they're doing. I'll keep in touch with Natalia, my niece in Florida, or Harry, who's wrestling in Japan, and they give me updates on how they're doing. And um, I try to give them as much encouragement or emotional support as I can. So yeah, so I'm thinking about wrestling still quite a bit on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, Ross, because like I said, you have got a wealth of knowledge for the business. You grew up in the business, you've lived it, you've worked every angle there is to work in a wrestling promotion. So there's nobody better than you to ask
Oh,
for.
I don't know. That's quite a high compliment,
Yeah.
Premier, but yeah, but it's been very rewarding, very satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ross, is there anything else that you would like to promote that maybe is upcoming or something like that?
Um, Well, I think the Dungeon promotion is putting on a show in October. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I think it'll be a good show. Chris Masters is the Stu Hart Heritage Champion, and he'll be defending the title. And they have a lot of good local stars from all over BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan that will be wrestling, and they bring in some big names for it as well. So I'm going to be looking forward to that next month.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm actually having Chris back on the show in a week or two. So we'll make
Oh, Chris
sure.
Masters,
Yeah.
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 Still a
So
good performer. Really works hard in the ring.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, he is.
I met him 22 years ago for the first
Wow.
time, Ross.
Yeah,
So when he was just starting out. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure that we mention that on his interview as well to give you guys some more promotion on that. But Ross, I would love to have you back on. I've got some other shows that we'll talk about maybe when we're off camera here.
sure.
But for today, I think that was a wonderful, wonderful insight into your life, into your family's life, and what you're doing. And we appreciate your time here on Victoire
Yeah,
very much.
absolutely, Amir. It was
Yep.
great to be on.
Thank you, sir. So
Okay.
stay on the line, Ross. I just want to say
Yeah,
goodbye to the viewers. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this wonderful episode of Victoire tonight, where we got to share in the life of Ross Hart from the legendary Hart family in Canada. Until next time, Victor what you must Victor in your life. I am Emir. This is Ross Hart, and this has been Victoire.